Hello and welcome to the lecture for Emergence. This article is from the Internet Encyclopedia of Philosophy and it's for our unit on property dualism. There's been a bit of a break between our previous lecture and this one, so just as a bit of a reminder, we can think about how we came to emergence theory. Way back at the beginning of the semester, we talked about substance dualism as beginning with Descartes' theories, and his ideas were that mind and body had to be two totally different kinds of things, of substances, because the mental world didn't seem easily reducible to physical objects. There are a lot of serious problems with substance dualism, so many over the centuries have rejected it in favor of materialism or physicalism, saying that everything that we can possibly know of or sense must be made up of the same kind of stuff, namely matter, the everyday matter that we see all around us in time and in space. And there's a certain subset of fields called property dualism, where instead of there being two different types of substances, we say there are two different types of properties. And we looked at supervenience, and the other major set of theories is emergence. So here we're going to take a look a little bit more in depth at emergence theories. In the article, there is a section about the history of emergence theories, especially in Britain. And while this is absolutely fascinating, and I would highly recommend it as reading if you're interested in this topic or if you were thinking about writing your term paper on emergence. But for us right now, all we really need to know is that the current set of emergence theories have some tendrils or roots in these early British Emergentists in the late 1800s. And one of their main examples was life force. So the idea was the reason some entities made up of matter were alive and some were not is because the living creatures were infused with some special property called life force, and that could not be explained by the actual physical material that living creatures were made up of. And one of the reasons that this seemed so compelling was because life is a complex thing to study, and people couldn't really figure out where this animate sort of drive or focus came from. Of course, as the relatively young field of biology developed, it created theories and experimentation that were able to replace the idea of life force with more contemporary concepts of things like metabolism. But the theories that these guys studied in the late 1800s, early 1900s, while they have some comparisons with modern property dualism, it would be better as an introduction to focus more so on current approaches to property dualism. So first, let's think about what emergence is. What would we mean when we say this is an emergentist theory? Well, okay. Pre-philosophically is a thing that some philosophers like to consider before they delve deep into defining their own particular theories. So pre-philosophically, it seems like we can easily pick things out, objects. It's not a hard task to say, here's one particular object that's distinct, unique, and separate to all the other objects around it. So people are individuals, trees, cars, books. And along with this, we have to try and resolve the idea that there's a strong intuition that all of these individual objects can be fully explained by their microstructure. So the idea of the Laplacian demon comes back, and this demon would be an entity that knew the position and speed of every single atom in the universe. So if this were the case, would that demon know everything that there is to know at the most fundamental level of the existence of matter? Does that fully explain every single property that manifests in the universe, including the property of being a book or the property of having a mind? That's reductionism in a nutshell. If you think that if we became future experts in the physics of the universe and we would learn all that there is to know about the universe and about ourselves at that microstructure level, then you are a reductionist. And if you are a reductionist, you must commit yourself to the further idea that things at the macro level that we interact with, people, rocks, books, trees, they're not real in the same way that fundamental properties are. They're an illusion, or they're just an agglomeration of all these fundamental particles. On the other hand, if you are an emergentist, you think that properties at the macro level are their own individual things, separate somehow from the laws of the microstructure that makes them up. So you have a human being, and of course we are made of trillions and trillions of atoms and subatomic particles and all the forces that hold it together. But if you're an emergentist, you think that the properties that we exhibit at this macro level are genuinely new. Of course, there's a microstructure. Of course, there are physical laws that describe how our atoms come together and drift apart. But that only entails that we have a relationship with the microstructure, not that the microstructure explains everything. But there are several different ways to be an emergentist, and we're going to take a look at strong and weak emergentism, and also diachronic and synchronic emergentism. Okay, so in section 2AI1, our author defines strong emergence as novelty, as irreducibility, and downward causation. Okay, so if you are a strong emergentist, she says, these new features that come in on the macro level are irreducible, number one, to their microstructure, either explanatorily or ontologically. And you have to make a case that the things at the macro level, like mind, can actually cause things on the micro level or the physical level. That's downward causation. So we can easily see how changes in our microstructure, in our brains, in our neurons, change mental properties. But you might recall from our previous few videos on property dualism and supervenience, it's harder to make a case that mental properties like wishing or hoping or emotions actually cause changes to the physical structure of our bodies. That's where we got epiphenomenalism, remember, where the mind is only an illusion and it's actually the physical causation underneath it all that's doing all of the work. But strong emergentists say this new thing, and for us in particular, it's mind and body. Mind is the new thing. Mental properties are the new thing. It's separate somehow to the material structure of its realization. Now, I had mentioned, and I should have maybe talked about it in the previous slide, that you could be against reducibility ontologically, or let's put ontologically and metaphysically together, and on the one hand, and then on the other hand we can put epistemologically. Okay, if you are an ontological emergentist, you think that actually out in the world, the thing itself cannot be physically reduced to the substructure, meaning that the new property in the world is real in the world. It's not just a way of us understanding it. If you don't believe in epistemological reduction, that's about knowledge, remember. You think that the differing levels in the world are how we perceive it, and we can't reduce the theory of mind to a theory of physics, but we really don't know what's happening in the world. It could or could not be reducible materially, but we won't be able to reduce it theoretically. Hopefully we'll get into this a little bit more, and I'll be able to explain it from another angle. So if you are a strong emergentist, you think this new property cannot be reducible and can cause changes in the physical world. So if you're a strong emergentist, your central problem is to demonstrate how exactly these new mental phenomena separate from the physical world, from the laws of the physical world. So we might grant to our opponents, if we're strong emergentists, that a mind does always have to be coupled with the brain. Minds don't just spontaneously appear. At least we've never had any experience of that quite yet. But how, then, if it must always be with a brain, can it separate itself as an entirely new property in the world? Our author for this article asks, what sort of novelty must a property exhibit in order for it to be strongly emergent? And this is where she proposes causation. Many authors have picked out the property of causation as the one to show you that it's an entirely new, separate property. So if a mental property can cause changes in the physical world, it has a new power that didn't exist before this emergent property existed. We'll see later that it doesn't have to be causation. There are cases in which theorists of strong emergence have said, no, we'll pick another property that makes the emergent properties separate to the parts, the sum of the parts that make it up. Okay, so this is a lot of theory. I have an example here to hopefully make it a tiny bit clearer. Okay, if it is indeed your personal desire to leave your apartment and go to the grocery store that causes your actions, then your mental state, that desire, actually has a causal power on your mechanical body. So you're sitting around and you think, well, I need some food, I need to go to the grocery store, and if it's that thought that actually causes you to stand up, find your wallet and your keys and leave, then your mental property of desire has a physical downward cause. But if desires are instead epiphenomenal, like we looked at in our last unit, like Frank Jackson thought, it's only because all of these complex functional systems in our body have computed that this is the thing that we need to do. And our feeling or our desire is only a byproduct of all of that complex physical interaction. We're more like biological robots with an illusion of choice. And in reality, as an epiphenomenalist, our mental life causes nothing. And here, like I previously mentioned, strong emergentists don't need downward causation to remain strong emergentists. But the other option of what causes an emergent property to be strongly emergent, there's an example in our text that might be a little bit confusing. Another author, Tim Crane, has a theory that even explanatory irreducibility might be enough to count as strong emergence. So this is where we might mix up the epistemological, or our knowledge and our way of getting knowledge from the world, with the ontological, which is the structure of the world itself. So we have those two realms, and philosophers have to always be extremely careful to not move from one into the other without noticing that they're doing so. When we talk about mental life, it's doubly hard, because our mental life, or our mental world or realm, is the way we know things, but it's also, in this instance, the subject of our study. We're trying to figure out exactly how our minds actually operate in the world, using our minds to do so. So we have to be really careful to delineate when we're talking about our knowledge of something and how we know it versus the structure of the thing itself. But of course, when we have a scientific mindset, or even in our everyday lives, when we're studying some phenomenon, whether it is biology of trees or our minds, we want to know about the thing itself. We don't want to know how we know it at that moment. We are actually looking for the structure of the thing. So the reason that Tim Crane, thinks explanatory irreducibility can count as a new property in the world is because if we were true reductionists, that Laplacian demon, we would think that subatomic physics, whatever it ends up being, because of course string theory and field theory are still being actively debated by physicists, whatever the fundamental unit of the universe ends up being, true strong reductionists would think that that theory was able to explain every single phenomena that ever happened. So he says, take something that's a macro object operating in our social world, like a dollar bill. Even if we were that demon that knew all of the microstructure perfectly, we would not be able to explain things like inflation, or a bull or a bear market, customer trust in the dollar's value, dividends in investing, or the stock market. It's just not the same kind of thing. The different levels are real because they are different kinds of things. Thus, we can't reduce our explanations, and Crane argues that that is a kind of strong emergence. What about weak emergence? More of the theories that people buy into as plausible are weak emergentist theories, so we'll see why in the next couple of slides. Our author says a property is emergent if it is a systemic property of a system that none of its smaller parts share, and it is unpredictable or unexpected given the properties and the laws governing the lower level, more fundamental domain from which it emerged. So if we think again of mind and body, we would say that mind is a systemic property of a system, and of course no individual neuron is infused with the property of thinking, of being able to reason, of being able to have emotions, of being able to have a desire. It's a property of the system as a whole. So this weak emergence is compatible with something like complex systems theory, with feedback loops and all of the parts adding together to make the whole. There's nothing new over, above, and beyond like there is in strong emergence. Instead, it's a complex system working together as a whole. And the additional criteria of having these new emergent properties being unexpected and hard to predict. So if you are that demon that knows all of the physical stuff, you would still find it hard to predict something like an economy or monetary value. And this is a purely epistemological kind of emergence for the most part. There are outlying theories, but the idea is it's about what we can and can't know as macro level human beings and our ability to conceptualize and predict how phenomena emerge from lower level structures into something complex and abstract. I guess a simple way to think about it is that strong emergentists think that the sum is more than the parts. Something new comes into existence over and beyond just pure addition. While as weak emergentists think that the sum is composed of all of the minute parts working together. And for this reason, you can be a reductionist and a weak emergentist at the same time. There are some examples that are from our text, talking about phase transition, hive insects, and their complex social structures, and their architecture. So we think about a hive insect stereotypically being a bee. They have very complex social structures guided by pheromone trails oftentimes. Their architecture with their hives is incredibly complex. And this is a perfect example for a weak emergentist because, of course, no one bee could create the intricate, complex structure of their hive. All of the bees have to come together with their programming, their biological programming, to make something way more complex and intricate than the sum of each of their parts, or than each of them. So the sum is all of them added together. Phase transition, if you may or may not recall from chemistry class, is the fact that matter, depending on temperature and pressure, can exist in different states. So the one we learn about most that's very important to human life is water, of course. We encounter water in the liquid form, the solid form of ice, the gaseous form of steam, and I know there are other states of matter, but we only have to worry about those three for now. And it's very counterintuitive and hard to predict why these states of matter should exist, why the same molecular substance should have a different form depending on temperature and pressure. So this is a kind of weak emergence. Once you get the actual molecule by itself and you add in the environmental factors like the temperature and pressure, it works as a system to produce these states of matter. Very, very hard to predict from understanding the microstructure of molecules alone. So there are several different kinds of emergence that our article takes a brief look at, and we are not going to spend too much time on them, again, because it's more important for us to get a general sense of the theory than to worry about all of the minor details all of the details, I should say. They're not minor details, they are dramatically varying theories. But this is more of a breadth course than it is a depth course. And if you are interested in this issue, again, this is the kind of thing you delve deeper into when you're writing a term paper. One last thing to mention, though, to get a fuller picture of how a weak emergentist views the structure of the world, are bridge laws. Bridge laws are a concept in the philosophy of science that proposes that we should be able to find a set of laws that will help us transition between apparent levels of nature. So we have the super microstructure, which are fields or strings, and we have subatomic particles, and atoms, and molecules, and we have solid matter, and then we have so-called dead matter like rocks and earth and dirt, but we also have living creatures. And then above that, there's the level of the social, and you can go up even further to cosmology, or how the entire universe is structured. And if we're weak emergentists and we think that there are new complex properties at each level, there should be a set of natural, scientific, discoverable laws that bridge between each level. So the entire universe can be described in the same materialist, physicalist schema. The last major division of emergentist theories are synchronic and diachronic emergence. If something is synchronic, it's something that we're focused on in a single moment in time. Think of the root of the word, synchronicity, or things are happening synchronously at the same time. So if we could freeze time and freeze a person's brain and map it, if you're a synchronic emergentist, you'd think we'd be able to see a mind in that single moment in time. It's about the complex structure of the way the neurons and the chemicals all work together in that moment in time. Most of the theories we've looked at are synchronic. They're talking about minds existing as complex functional systems at any given moment. But other people have come in and said, well, that's not how systems actually work. They work dynamically in time, and that's diachronic emergence. You need to see a stretch of time to see how a functional system operates. So if we had this time-sliced frozen brain, we wouldn't be able to see the mind. We have to restart time and watch the physical system operating in time to actually see a mind. And by see, I mean observe. So functionalism, the theory that we looked at previously, can support diachronic theories because they're talking about how it's not just the physical component parts, it's about the operation of those physical component parts. And while this might be intuitively very appealing, we still need a reason as to why a diachronic theory contributes anything to our understanding of mind. Our article tells us that these diachronic theories can be understood in terms of unpredictability of states or properties from a past state of that system. I put form there, sorry, that was a typo. So now they're saying if we had that time slice and we understood the brain perfectly, we knew all the neurons and all the firings, we'd still not be able to predict what the next state of the brain and mind would be. And that's the kind of emergence they're talking about. Mind is unfolding through time, and it is difficult to predict what that looks like compared to the changes in the underlying structure of the body. At the very end, she takes, well, there's a section on supervenience that I skipped because we spent a good deal of time on that in the previous set of videos. So you can look at that section as kind of a review, and we can skip right to the section that is meant to be a counter argument against strong emergence. Because if you were going to be an intellectually honest, strong emergentist, you'd have to figure out if there are any real cases of strong emergence, something brand new in the world, over and above the component parts added together. And things aren't looking great for the strong emergentists. The best counter argument against these people who are fighting the strong emergentists have to be arguments from ignorance. We just don't know yet. Our knowledge of biology and the physical world is not yet comprehensive enough to know this kind of thing. There are possible ways that you could argue for possible cases of strong emergentism. We experience free will, or capability of having agency, which means the ability to make choices and direct our own lives. And that is a strong experience for human beings. If pure physical determinism were true, and the mental could not affect the physical at all, that would also be an illusion. We would have zero agency, only the illusion of it. There's another possible theory where mental events link physical events. So if you think back, or if you go back to the previous set of lectures and you see how the supervenience theorist says, well, it has to be physical state 1 affecting physical state 2, and it's hard to see how the mental can break in there. This person says, okay, mental state 1 affects physical state 1, which creates mental state 2, which creates physical state 2. So it's like a seesaw pattern of causation. So there are theorists who try and still argue for genuine, strong emergence, but it is a more difficult position to support. That's the end of this one. This was a relatively technical set of arguments, so if you have confusions, please email me and ask questions or come to my office hours. Otherwise, I will see you in the next video.